Hello again. I am currently answering questions that were posted in the comment section of previous videos. This particular question is one that I get asked a lot. This particular questioner seems to have an anti-Calvinist bias to his question, but he's still asking an important question, which is essentially, is God the author of sin? The way he puts it, you can read it right here on the screen, but the way he puts it is if we are promoting absolute determinism, then we are saying that God is responsible for our sinfulness. So let's talk about that because it's a really good question. Let's begin by defining the term author, because I think sometimes people misunderstand the way that the God of the Bible works. I oftentimes think that people in good conscience are simply attempting to protect the reputation of the God of the Bible. So knowing that he is holy and righteous, they can't even imagine that he has anything to do with sin at all. And I think they come at it from a good place. I just think that their God is too small, to coin a phrase. The God of the Bible takes responsibility for everything within his creation. I'm going to look down and to my left for a moment, and I'm going to read you a little bit of Isaiah 45, because it is indicative of the way that God describes himself. He says this about himself: I am Yahweh, I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that men may know from the rising to the setting of the sun that there is no one else besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I am the one forming the light and creating darkness, causing well-being and creating calamity. I am Yahweh who does all these things. So that's just one of many examples where God takes responsibility for everything that happens in his creation. He says, I'm the one who does all of it, whether it's darkness, whether it's light, whether it's well-being, whether it's blessings, or whether it's raw is the Hebrew word, the calamities, the difficulties of this life. And he's very clear in saying, I, the Lord, do all this. I do everything. So when we say that God is sovereign, we are saying that he is in charge of everything, but we're also saying that everything serves his ultimate purpose. And the fact that sin exists must serve his ultimate purpose, or else sin would not exist. In fact, as soon as Adam and Eve rebelled in the garden, he could have wiped them out right then and there, started over, made two more people, and then kept them righteous and pure. But that's not what he did. If you think about it, I know I've made a video about this before, but in a very brief, truncated fashion, let's review the details of the Garden of Eden. So Adam and Eve were formed in the Garden of Eden, and they were essentially innocent. Now, we know that they weren't made perfect so that they could not sin, because they do sin. But they were innocent, and therefore they were naked and had no shame about it, no awareness of their nakedness, because they had no conscience of sin. So then God said to them, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The day that you eat it, you will die. So why did God put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden to begin with? If he didn't want them to eat from it, if his intention was that they never touch it, he certainly could have walled it off. He could have planted it outside the garden. He didn't have to plant it at all. But being sovereign God, he placed the temptation there in front of them. And then you know the story that the serpent, Satan himself, speaks to Eve and entices her to eat that fruit and lies to her and says, God knows that the day you eat of it, you'll be like him. Your eyes will be open. You'll know good and evil. And so when that all took place, when the temptation took place, when Satan was in the garden, I have to assume that God knew that was all taking place. Why didn't he interrupt it? Why didn't he stop Satan from talking to the woman? Why did he allow Satan in his garden in the first place? It was God who provided both the temptation and the tempter, and then allowed that conversation to take place. Once God knew that Eve had rebelled against him, why didn't he cut her off instantly, cast her east of Eden, and keep Adam pure? Instead, he allowed that Adam would also participate with his wife so that they were both fallen, they were both sinful. So why? Why did he do these things? These are the kind of questions that my brain asks, and it has to be because it served his greater purpose. What is his greater purpose? His greater purpose is to get glory for himself and to glorify his Son. And part of that glorification of his Son was that he was going to send his Son to earth to redeem fallen humanity so that every knee would bow, every tongue would confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Okay, if that's the goal for God, then there have to be some fallen people, some fallen humanity who need redemption. A redemption that could only be accomplished by Christ himself, and therefore Christ gets all the glory. How did he accomplish that? Well, he created people, and then he created an environment in which they could fall. And then he provided a temptation and a tempter. Sure enough, the fall came about, and all of that serves his greater purpose. So can we take that example and say that that also extends out into all sinfulness in human life? I would argue, yes, it does. Because God doesn't have to be the author of sin. It doesn't have to emanate from him. We know that he is holy and righteous, and so therefore no sin comes from him. And when I hear the word author of sin, that's the way I think of it, like he is the one actively doing it. He's engaging it. He's beginning it. It's coming from him. But God works through secondary causes. If you want a good example, God doesn't personally teach you the gospel. He uses ministers. He didn't individually, personally talk to everybody in Israel. He sent prophets. And the same thing, he doesn't personally, individually have to cause sin. He uses Satan. You know, when Satan caused the fall, God could have put him into the lake of fire right then. In the book of Revelation, we read that there is a lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels, and we know that's ultimately where he's going. After he spends an extended period, 1,000 years, it says, in the abyss, where he is chained and has a seal on him, and then he is released, and then he goes to the lake of fire. Okay, so knowing that God has that kind of control over Satan, knowing that Satan is a created being, he's a fallen angel, at any point that God wants to, he can put Satan into the abyss, or he can put him into the lake of fire. He can do that whenever he wants to. But he hasn't yet. Why didn't he do it immediately after the fall in Eden? Take care of Adam and Eve, wipe them out, send them away, cast them into outer darkness, put Satan into the lake of fire, create two new people who are then perfect, righteous, and holy. Why didn't he do that? Well, obviously the answer is because all these things serve his ultimate purpose in the glorification of himself and in the glorification of his Son. Satan is, remember, God's Satan, and Satan is the cause of the sinfulness in this world. the fallenness of this world and the natural proclivity of human flesh to be at odds, to be at enmity with the law of God, the holiness, the standards of God. When you combine our natural sinfulness, remember, we are not sinners because we sin because we're sinners. We are born into this sinful estate ever since Adam. And then we have Satan tempting us, and temptation is all around us, and so we fall into sin. And that is all being accomplished through the secondary agency of Satan and his demons, who are under the control of God, who is sovereign over all of it. So God does not have to sully himself. He doesn't have to dirty his hands to make people sin, but he is still sovereign over the fact that people do sin, and ultimately it serves his glory. And when this time of sinful flesh dominating the planet, when this age comes to its end and the new age is ushered in, when there is no more Satan and no more temptation, when we finally put on glorified bodies where there's no more sin and no more death and no more sickness, that'll be a good day. When God wipes away every tear, well, then that will be the ultimate glorification of humanity by a sovereign God. But in the age we're living in right now, sin is everywhere, and it does serve God's ultimate purpose in glorifying his Son. So, is God the author of sin in an absolute determinist way? Well, no. But does he use secondary causes in order to accomplish his will for his creation? Yes. And is sin part of his overall plan for humanity and the ultimate glorification of his Son? Yes, sin plays a vital part in that. Now, are we as humans also responsible? Will people be judged for their sinfulness? Yes, absolutely. Does that create a conundrum for our human logic, our human thinking, our human brains? Well, yes, it does. And in fact, Paul addresses that very question. After he has laid out his defense, his argument of God's sovereignty in salvation and in judgment, he then asks the question. He knows it's coming. He knows the question is coming. You will then say to me, well, then how does God find fault, seeing as no one has resisted his will? And that's a really good question. How can God sovereignly both cause and allow sin and then judge people for their sinfulness? And Paul's answer is, your God is too small. His answer is, who are you, O man, to answer back to God? In other words, that's the way God is. That's the way this whole thing works, and you don't really get a say in it. I would advise that knowing that that's how God is and what God is like, the best approach is to get down on your face in front of that God and admit that he is everything that you can imagine God to be, and that he is the ruler, the sovereign over his creation, and that everything, including sickness and death, which are the results of sin, all those things serve his ultimate purpose. And his ultimate purpose is the glorification of himself and his Son. And so all we can do is read the Bible for everything it says, and then bring our thinking in league with what it says. And what it says is, he is righteous and holy. He does not author sin. Sin does not emanate from him, but sin exists in his creation as a result of his creation. He utilizes secondary means in order to accomplish those things, and all of those things are going to redound to his glory because he is indeed absolutely sovereign. So, long answer to a short question, but I hope that it helped, and I hope that you didn't have to duct tape your brain closed in order to gather all those things. Just rest assured that these are things that even Paul did wrestle with. And even he did not give an answer beyond, that's just what God is like. And so I can't do better than that. I can't argue any better than to say, that's what it says. And since that's what it says, that's what I also have to say. So, hope that helped. Talk to you again soon.